and then we can jump back and forth.
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right, we're live on YouTube now. This is my first time being live on YouTube.
And I can see you on the YouTube, so it's working.
All right. And Claire, you said you'll look at questions on YouTube, so Udita and I don't have to.
Yes, so there is a weird quirk with Zoom in that I, as a panelist, cannot enter a question on the Q&A. And because I can't do that, I will have to utilize the chat to distribute the questions, unless you would prefer that I put them in the Slack. Oh no, you guys can't unmute yourselves. Yes, please don't mute yourselves now, because I've made it so the attendees cannot unmute themselves. So yeah, don't mute yourselves anymore. So Jose, I think I unmuted you.
Yeah, we're good. Okay. We're thank you.
No problem. And then yeah, if that happens in some way, please let me know, or someone yell my name and then I'll come and fix it. But so do you want them in the chat or on the Slack, Joel?
The chat's good.
Okay.
I have the Slack open too, but
yeah, I think
chat is easier. Something will do a better job of pinging at me.
Yes.
Yeah, I think chat is better.
Okay. So we're still waiting on Sakobi.
I sent him just pinged him.
Okay.
He normally shows up right on the dot.
Yeah.
It seems like he's a busy person.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know if we should start letting participants in or if we should wait for him to arrive. You just tell me, because we're also in practice mode, so no one can join until
Yeah, my sense is maybe give him a couple minutes.
Okay.
And hope he pops in.
Yeah, I think we can if he's not here at a minute beforehand, I think we can let participants in and chat awkwardly with participants for a minute so they know what's happening. Or 30 seconds before the hour.
Yeah.
Something like that.
You can plug the next event also. And yeah.
Oh yeah, I meant to make a flyer to post while we let people in, but didn't happen.
You could screen share the website if you wanted to do anything. You don't have to, but that would.
Yeah, I think it's okay. I think I can just plug it.
Yeah.
On the Twitter. Is it Ryan Emanuel who's been posting?
Yes, Ryan did a takeover yesterday.
Yeah.
Oh, that was really great.
Do we have other people lined up for today, or was he the only one?
He was the only one, but he posted a lot of great resources, so you can just direct people there to check it out.
Yeah.
All right, it's 9:59.
Yeah, I guess we can start, and I'll plug some things while we're waiting for.
I gotta check. I think I've got his number. All right, 1 second.
All right, I'll start broadcasting and I'll let people trickle in, and we can just say we're waiting for a panelist. Okay. All right, this is the last you'll hear of my voice.
See you, Claire.
See ya.
To give Sakobi a quick ring.
Yeah. So hi, everyone. Welcome to the EPSP Connects panel on the intersection of geomorphology and environmental justice. We're going to get started in another minute or two, but wanted to let you all into the panel to settle in as we get going. So hang tight, and we'll be starting in about another minute.
All right, that'll be.
So while people are still trickling in, just wanted to take the time to also announce if you're interested in environmental justice, Ryan Emanuel did a nice takeover on our Twitter account yesterday at HU_EPSP, where he posted a bunch of great resources about environmental justice. If you're interested in doing a Twitter takeover on environmental justice, you should direct message our account. And we're going to be trying to post more resources there. And our environmental justice theme will continue into next month. On November 18th, we're going to have a talk from Josh Galster of Montclair State University, who's going to be talking about the demographics of dam removal. So we're going to be trying to highlight different types of environmental justice issues and the way they intersect with geomorphology over the next month. We are still waiting for our last panelist to join in. So we're gonna wait another minute or so to see if Sakobi can join, and then we will move forward. So one thing, the Q&A button on Zoom should be open to all of you. The format for today is going to be that we have kind of 5 pretty general questions that we're going to ask the panelists that are related to kind of what is environmental justice and how do you get involved and how does it intersect with geomorphology. And we're hoping we're going to have 10 or 15 minutes at the end for you to ask questions that we don't answer. So the best way to do that is for you to put it in the Q&A box, and then we can do it. If you're watching on YouTube, you can put your questions in the YouTube chat box, and we're monitoring that and be able to ask those questions as well. I think we should go ahead and get started, and hopefully Sakobi will be able to join us. So I'm Joel Scheingross. I'm one of the volunteers who helps put together these panels for EPSP Connects. And on the left on my screen is Hudita Mukherjee, who's another one of our EPSP Connects volunteers. So welcome to this panel on the intersection of environmental justice and geomorphology. And great, we now have a full panel here. So we're very fortunate today to have experts in the intersection of environmental justice and geomorphology from many different perspectives. We have Rebecca LeVay from Indiana University Bloomington, Jose Constantine from Williams College, and Sakobi Wilson from University of Maryland. They can all do a much better job of introducing themselves and telling us a bit about their background and how they got into environmental justice than I can. So I'd like to start with Rebecca and ask all the panelists to go through and give a bit of an introduction and tell us their bio in relation to environmental justice and geomorphology.
Super. So, you know, environmental justice is something that I got very interested in during my PhD program and then after. And, you know, what I was trying to do in my PhD program was to think about the political, so I should say my degree is in geography from UC Berkeley, and I was trying to think about the political economy of stream restoration and how it is that kind of social, economic, political issues shape the practice of stream restoration. And the more I thought about that, the more just the politics of it, the inequalities that came up, became very vivid to me. So I have become part of the field of critical physical geography, trying to think about how we combine attention to various kinds of power differentials in society around race, class, gender, how those intersect with physical processes. So that's the big thing that I work on. I will hand it off to the next person.
Great. How about Jose?
Yeah, thanks, Joel. I've gotten only recently involved, shamefully so, in environmental justice. I'm from a place that suffers many environmental, or certainly has suffered many environmental injustices, Hopewell, Virginia, chemical capital of the South. But growing up as a kid, I wasn't aware really of what those smokestacks meant in my city. They were, they were symbols of stable employment. They were a means for working class families to provide a means, to put food on the table, you name it. But it's only, recently, since learning more about the roots of the environmental movement and environmentalism, and how, many of those roots are tied to social justice, that, I've started to appreciate, I think, more about, how important it is and the role that geomorphologists can play in helping to address some of the major environmental issues that many communities in need, communities of color, poor communities, poor white communities, you name it, all the issues that they face. And so recently with Claire, who you can't see, Claire and I are working with a community in East St. Louis, near East St. Louis. And we also are working with a community in Southwest Florida to help put into practice what we know, or what we think we know about geomorphology and about how Earth's surface works, and applying that knowledge to help communities in need.
Great, thanks, Jose. And Sakobi?
Yeah, so I'm at the University of Maryland College Park. I direct the program of community engagement and environmental justice and health right now. I'm also a member of the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, NEJAC. So NEJAC advises the EPA on EJ issues. So I've been doing EJ work probably, I was introduced to it as an undergrad. Back in '94, I think I probably did my first EJ project. I met Dr. Robert Bullard, one of the EJ icons at a conference at Elizabeth City State back in '95. And I also met Dr. Benjamin Chavis, who coined the term environmental racism at the same event, in the fight against the PCB landfill in Warren County. So I knew what I wanted to do after I kind of met them. But I grew up in a community with a highway, with a landfill, with a sewage treatment plant, with a concrete rock breaking facility. My dad is a pipe fitter. So my dad has worked at nuclear power plants. My dad has actually worked at coal-fired power plants, building a lot of these pollution-intensive facilities. So, my experience was really experience of, growing up in a community that's, in close proximity to these locally wanted land uses. And also just knowing that I wanted to, as a young person, get a degree where I could actually do some work to understand how the environment impacts human health. So I've been kind of on this path for a long time, and really about how we dismantle racist systems. And environmental racism is a major driver of environmental injustice. So I'm happy to be here, and I'll speak more about those issues as we panel today.
Great, thanks, Toby, and thanks to all the panelists for joining in. I want to hand it over to Udita to go with our first question.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us for this panel today, and thank you so much for your introductions. I would actually like to direct the first question to Sakobi, and the question is I think it's a question from me and everyone else, because we get to know this term so not that often. So how can you define environmental justice? And if you could just tell us what the term actually means to you.
Yeah, so for me, there's environmental justice science and the environmental justice movement. So the environmental justice movement is a social movement where folks fighting against the disproportionate burden of environmental hazards and locally wanted land uses. So LULU, so we talk about incinerators, petrochemical operations, refineries, factories, paper mills, concrete plants, heavily trafficked roadways, right? Industrial animal operations. You think about chicken farming in Eastern Shore of Maryland, the Delmarva region, or hog farming in Iowa or in North Carolina. So anywhere where you have these facilities or land uses that are pollution intensive, that can impact the air, water, and soil, that can lead to, burden disparities of these hazards, lead to exposure disparities of folks living in those communities, lead to risk disparities, which lead to the health disparities. And when you think about environmental injustice, EPA has a definition of it's the fair treatment, meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, class, blah, 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 as relationship and implementation of laws and regulations. That's a kumbaya definition. I don't like the definition. It doesn't take into account social historical context. It doesn't take into account racism, right? Environmental racism, you have environmental injustice. We're trying to advance or achieve environmental justice. Environmental racism is the targeting of communities based on their race for these hazards land uses. It's environmental racism when folks who are making decisions don't look like the folks who were impacted by the decisions. So the planning boards, the councils, the town councils, et cetera. And then I actually have another term, environmental slavery. I don't think environmental racism is a strong enough term, where it really speaks to how some communities, you have differential burdens and differential benefits, right? So literally, you're using my community as for this discussion about that we're having today. You're basically using my community as a sink for pollution. So whether it be incinerator, and remember, with environmental justice, just not one hazard, it's multiple hazards. It's the cumulative impacts of multiple hazards on communities of color, on BIPOC communities, on low wealth communities, on those communities been historically marginalized and disenfranchised in this country, And so when you think about so your economic power equates to your political power. So you see this intersection between race and class a lot. But if you look at the distribution of these hazards from an environmental slavery perspective, communities are being used to host these land uses. And they're also used as sinks for pollution. So their biotic, abiotic components of their ecosystems are used as sinks for pollution. That'll be good for this discussion today. But also their bodies are also used as sinks for pollution. So you have this environmental slavery, environmental oppression, and then some communities benefit from that, right? There's been studies that talked about super polluters. There's studies talking about the pollution tax that communities of color, low wealth communities experience compared to white or wealthy communities, right? And so you are absorbing these toxicants in, and it has these intergenerational effects. You become socially and geographically bounded and stuck in those communities. You've heard the term sacrifice zones. We never talk about an incinerator being put in a wealthy white community because it would never happen. So part of the problem was with environmental laws and regulations, you have baked in racism, you have baked in privilege, and so the inequities in how the laws are implemented is part of the reason why we have environmental justice. Look at the history of segregation in this country, redlining in this country. So all these various policies, inequities in our zoning policies, inequities in the housing policies, inequities in our transit policies, inequities in our food policies, inequities in economic policies, these all contribute to environmental injustice. But getting back to this point about environmental slavery, you host these land uses and you don't get any benefits, no social benefits, no health benefits, no environmental benefits, no economic benefits. I'll stop there. Well, no, I can keep going. Do I have more time? I can say more on this.
Yes, thank you so much. But I think we will talk more about all these issues in the next questions. Yeah.
Yep.
Jose, Rebecca, do you want to add anything to this question?
I might just add one quick thing, which is that, one of the intensely frustrating things about environmental racism is that to try to prove that it's happening, to demonstrate it, there becomes this enormous burden of proof on the communities that are affected, on their bodies, on them having to submit themselves for medical tests, on all these kinds of things to demonstrate the harms, instead of tracing the roots of the pollution itself. And this is one of those ways in which I feel like the geomorphology and earth sciences community could actually contribute really positively in thinking about environmental justice. I'll just say that.
Thank you.
So Sokobi made me nervous when he showed up a minute or two late, but we needed Sokobi's voice and spirit. The man can preach. But I think what Rebecca and Sokobi said, spot on. I think You know, and just piggybacking on what Rebecca just said, you know, in the communities that we've been working with, and communities who have been dealing with decades and decades of exposure to contaminants, to, you know, suffering from chronic flooding, you know, they know what's going on. They know the truth. They don't need scientists to come in and tell them what they already know. And I think that's where I've had to learn and relearn, you know, what it is that I'm doing and the purpose that I'm serving, you know, in the communities that we're working with. And in a lot of ways, just as Rebecca said, all we're really doing is just translating the truth into a form, you know, that leverages power, you know, turns scientific knowledge into some sort of political capital to fight for change. And I think that's an ongoing lesson for me. And I think it's something that, you know, is true for all of us, you know, as academics getting involved in communities who are struggling with these issues.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for all those insights. Joel, do you want to?
Yeah, so I want to kind of piggyback on something that Rebecca was mentioning, and that's that environmental justice is a wide field. And I was hoping that we could actually talk a little bit more and illustrate to our audience how aspects of geomorphology or Earth surface processes actually can accentuate some of these injustices that are happening, or ways that they might be able to mitigate some of these injustices, but really be explicit in defining the role of how geomorphology actually intersects with this field. And Rebecca, since you started to bring this up, I'd like to point this to you first, and then we'll come back to the other panelists if they have anything to add.
Well, you know, the things that I think about in relation to this are for example, unequal exposure to flooding. You know, I feel like all I should have to say to you is Hurricane Katrina, and that should be enough to convince you of this. You know, in terms of the idea that we literally have wealth on the higher ground. So thinking about that, thinking about coastal processes and sea level rise and how that affects different, you know, different communities differently. So, you know, in South Carolina, where I spend a fair bit of time, places like Debbie do get permission to build, you know, seawalls, and other communities don't, right? So thinking about how that works. You know, I'm more on the fluvial geomorphology side myself, but I also think a lot about dust and aeolian processes and the way that those are disproportionately impacting air quality for people. So those were the ones that were on my mind. But, you know, Jose, I would love to turn this over to you.
Yeah, you know, I think as geomorphologists, we are uniquely placed, you know, amongst the earth sciences for engaging with this problem. You know, we study the surface of the planet and all the things that control how that surface changes, how it, you know, triggers catastrophic events like landslides and flooding, you name it. And it's the place that we call home. You know what I mean? We think about the place that all of us lives on and respond to when things happen. You know, much of the EJ work in terms of scholarship and activism has focused on, rightfully so, on the impacts of contamination, air quality, water quality, you know, soil quality, you name it. And so, you know, a background in chemistry, you know, is super helpful. But there are other, just as Rebecca said, you know, chronic flooding. We have, you know, when catastrophic flooding does happen, we saw what Katrina taught us. You know, the Black community in New Orleans is still struggling from the impacts of Katrina through lead contamination of soils, you name it. You know, Claire and I are working with a Black community called Centerville, who, you know, the mismanagement of the existing, you know, fluvial geomorphic landscape has led to flooding on an almost monthly basis, you know, condemning homes, you know, filling up sewers and pushing sewage to the surface, you name it, chronic, terrible issues that this community has struggled with for a long time. So I think, you know, we have a lot to give as an academic community. You know, there's so many skills that we can leverage for communities in need, ways of translating knowledge and ways of helping to think up solutions. You know what I mean? We'll talk about this, I think, later together, but there's a lot we can do. And honestly a lot we should be doing.
Great. Thanks, Jose and Rebecca. So Kobe, do you have anything you'd want to add on this topic about how geomorphology and environmental justice intersect?
Of course, geomorphology is not my field, but I'll give you some examples that may be relevant. So we just got a EPA grant funded to look at disasters and toxic releases and flooding in North Carolina and South Carolina. So that's very relevant. North Carolina, because a lot of the concentrated animal feeding operations are in the eastern part of North Carolina, so the hydrophysiologic plain, if that makes sense to y'all, because that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's not my area, but it's a term that's used a lot. So try to give y'all a word that, oh yeah, we know that stuff. So yeah, so that's so the water table issue, right? And unfortunately, it's the same issue in Eastern Shore of Maryland. We got Chesapeake Bay. We already have sea level issues, right? So it's really interesting to me. You have Hurricane Floyd. For those of you know about North Carolina, Hurricane Floyd hit North Carolina in 1999. We had a lot of hogs and chickens that drowned, right? Talking about Katrina, you had a toxic soup that people had escaped through, animal waste, human waste, right? Hurricane Florence just hit a couple years ago, 11 trillion gallons of rain dumped. Did they learn from Hurricane Floyd? No, right? So that's an example. I'm also doing work in Uniontown, Alabama. Uniontown, may or may not know about it, 20 miles from Selma. They have a landfill, takes trash from 33 states, that's built on the top of an old plantation cemetery. But what's relevant to this discussion, beyond just the landfill issues, and that community is unincorporated too. That's not the EJ issue. A lot of times, communities are unincorporated of where you see a lot of this industrial hazards place. So just want to note that for y'all. But they don't, when you flush your toilet, your waste goes to a sewage treatment plant. When they flush their toilet, their waste goes to a containment pond. Then it's sprayed on the ground. Similar to what happens with human sludge, bile solid application, or hog farm waste, when you think about spraying of liquid effluent, because of the Alabama red clay, that stuff can get into the aquifer really quickly. So you have people on well water, and so the water quality can be impacted. So you have recharge issues and also runoff issues, right? And then back to CAFOs, one of the very important issues is a lot of folks are exposed to agricultural operations, the impacts of particularly CAFOs. You had chemical impacts and microbial impacts, but most of these folks are getting on well water. So they're highly vulnerable to contamination, right? So those are, I think, a few relevant examples to this group, but I think in many communities I work in, Uniontown, Savannah, I do a lot of work on goods movement. We need folks who understand these processes and who can help do monitoring, because the current regulatory, the monitoring system, the monitoring footprint that the EPA has does not reflect the industrial footprint. So we need much more monitoring.
Great, thank you, Sakobi. Okay, I think we're going to continue on this theme, and I'm going to ask Udita to give the next question.
Yes, thank you so much. So this is also a question, the next question is also a question that I actually have, because I study sea level change, so it's very connected. So what is your opinion on the role of academic research in geoscience in the context of EJ? And in order to reduce environmental justices, are there pressing scientific questions that our community should be focusing on, the geomorphology community? Or should we focus our efforts on better scientific communication and getting involved at the community level? Jose, if you can start, and then we can go around.
Yeah. Udita, those are amazing, very good questions for sure. I'll speak to myself and the journey that I've been on. I've spent much of my early geomorphology career thinking about meandering rivers and oxbow lakes and things that are relatively esoteric and not directly impactful to communities or relevant to communities. And recently, what I've found or realized about myself is that being an academic is such a privilege, right? It's such a privilege to do what we do, to dream up questions, to chase curiosity-driven research, and we get taxpayers to help fund our work, and we work with great students, and once I realized and appreciated that privilege, that none of that privilege happens in a vacuum. Our work does not happen in a vacuum, and we can sit in our ivory towers enjoying this great work while knowing that there are communities who are struggling with the issues that they're struggling with, like we have a decision to make. We either say we're okay with that or we're not, and we have to do something about it. And I think that's where, it's going to be, everyone's going to have a unique set of talents to bear to these issues, are going to have a network of people they can tap into to get involved. It'll play itself out in a number of ways. For me, it's felt more impactful to get involved with communities at a very local level, because that's where, from my perspective, the suffering and need is at. You'll hear from Sokobi, and I'll ask Sokobi to talk about the higher level stuff that also plays a big role in this. In this community that I've been working with in Talavas, small Black community just outside of Sarasota. It was a rural, historical community, and it just slowly but surely became swallowed up by sprawl. And the powers that be were making decisions for this community. They ended up okaying a beryllium processing plant to literally open up across the street. Folks could throw a rock from their house, their front yard, and hit the plant. That plant does what every plant does. It started to leak poisons into the groundwater, in this case, organic solvents, and poisoned the water supply that this community was using, right, for their daily life. And this story plays itself out over and over again. But, I think we, as academics, a lot of these communities, and I'll stop here, but what I will say is a lot of what, these communities face, they don't have the political means to get them addressed immediately. And you heard Sokobi say the economic means to get them addressed immediately. And what we can provide as academics, and we don't have to have anyone pay for our time or our expertise. We can donate that, you know what I mean? And that's tremendous power already, or at least good that can come from just that. And that could speed up, the process of getting these issues addressed. So I think we have the time, we have the talent. Let's get to it. Let's get busy. Let's get involved.
That's great suggestion. I love that. Rebecca, do you want to add something to this?
I would love to add something to this. So, I 100% agree with what Jose has just said. And, I think, to me, the question is less about finding thinking about it from our own scientific interests, and more about connecting with communities and putting ourselves at their service. There are some interesting precedents for various forms of, it's often called participatory action research, or basically the idea of serving communities' research interest needs within the geomorphology community that I just want to highlight for people that exists. So there's things like Dave Millage and Stuart Lane's work doing flood modeling for communities, doing the modeling the way they want it, which has involved doing very different things than the kinds of modeling that we normally do. I also really want to highlight the work of folks like Deirdre Wilcock and Colleen Fox and Claire Wilkinson, who are doing amazing work with Indigenous communities. So really working on how you can do geomorphology in the service of other people's goals. Of these community goals. So that seems very important to me. I would love to just say one more thing, which maybe takes us in a slightly different direction, but I feel like we have some joint responsibilities here. We have our responsibility to the communities that we work with, but then I think we also need to do some work to get our house in order in the geosciences and in geomorphology. And I'm thinking of a lot of different things here, but to me, this is part of having a critical perspective and attending to power relations in what we do. We need to look not just at the world around us, but also at ourselves and what we're doing. So, within my experience of geomorphology training in grad school and sense is that there's really kind of tremendous disparities in terms of race and gender, in terms of who becomes a geomorphologist, and that has a lot of different ramifications. So there have been some amazing studies about the culture that produces and the culture that leads to it. So I want to point to Leonora King and her colleagues' studies of how people behaved at CGU, at the Canadian Geophysical Union. I'm sorry, I will get that right eventually. And how women and people of color were interrupted more, how the audience was more restless when they were talking, and how that went up more depending on how many women or scholars of color were on the panel, right? Things along those lines. I want to point to a study that I have heard about that the graduates in EPS at Berkeley did about why people were passing qualifying exams at different rates, why women and students of color were passing their qualifying exams less frequently, and getting to this concept of white male swagger, and how that really was something that was expected in qualifying exams, and if people weren't doing that, they didn't pass, even if they were doing really strong, giving really strong answers. I want to talk about the prevalence of assault during field work. This is not a pleasant thing to talk about, but we are a field science, and it's really important to acknowledge this. I'm thinking of the Clancy et al. Study from 2014, which showed that 71% of women had been harassed while doing field work. And excuse me, I'm just getting my numbers right. 26% had been physically assaulted while doing field work. Okay, so these are things that we need to think about to get our scientific community in a more just place too. And I'm not trying to say that we should privilege that above the kinds of amazing work that Jacoby and Jose do. I'm not trying to suggest that at all, but I want to say that I think it's part of it, because part of willingness to work with community, part of willingness to work with communities, part of willingness to put ourselves at the community service has to do with walking back our understandings of expertise and our own authority, and opening up the conversation more. So I just want to say that I think that part's important too.
I think that's a really important part of it, because
Can I chime in on this?
yeah, sure, yeah.
I'm gonna chime in after you. I want to this question.
I was going to go to you, so.
Oh, okay, sorry. So Rebecca, you getting to me? I'm like, okay, Jose know how I gets about these issues, so I agree with you 100%. And thanks for that, letting me chime in. So just a couple of things. So I'm on the board of the Citizen Science Association. So we've been internally talking about, our own JEDI, not DEIJ, but JEDI, work, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion work. So I think, Rebecca, you're exactly right. I think we need to change the culture of science, change the culture of academia, change the culture of science. I'm on the National Academy of Sciences, the best board on environmental studies and toxicology. So that's relevant to this discussion. And we just had 2 weeks ago, we just had a DIIJ discussion about the academies. What are you doing when it comes to diversity and inclusion? It's just not good enough to have people who don't look like you. How do you make sure that there's an inclusive climate and environment from the actual learners, Rebecca said? I mean, I'm at the University of Maryland. We are in a county that's 60% people of color. We have less than 5% people of color faculty since 1996. Okay, right? Okay. You get funding. I have a blog. I put it in the chat. I did a blog on scientific racism, scientific colonialism, scientific imperialism. Oh, what is that? We defined in the blog. Historically Black colleges in 2015, I believe, received less than 3% of federal funding. So we have fundamental problems within I call it the research industrial complex, right? Fundamental problems. So we need to focus on STEM. We need to focus on bringing in more people who don't look like us. Cultural context matters. Cultural lenses, diverse cultural lenses matter, right? We did change our incentivization, public parish. I'm the editor-in-chief of environmental justice. It's great, but do I believe that peer-reviewed publications, is that true science communication? No, that is incomplete scientific communication. I was on National Academy of Sciences Committee discussion about a month ago on science communication for NAS and what we should be doing. What we were talking about, the same discussion. We need to engage more frontline, fence line communities in this work, bring in more youth of color into this work, focus more on STEM in this work, do a better job of retention in this work. We need to use technology better. Some scientists say, hey, it's not my job to do science communication that's not peer-reviewed publication. That's a choice. Oh, you get a political, Jacoby, when you talk about that. Your choice to not do action work, that's a political decision too. Let's just be honest with ourselves. So we're having these discussions within Citizen Science Association. I'm gonna form another group for y'all to think about. I'm a former board member of Community Campus Partnerships for Health. Look into that group. Talk about CBPR, participatory action research. I've been doing CBPR since grad school, so over 20 years. Work in Savannah, work in Charleston, working on CAFOs, right? So you have to have the frontline, frontline folks driving the work. One of my community mentors in Savannah, Dr. Mildred McLean, said, Jacoby, we live in the communities. We are the real subject matter experts. So we need to uplift their knowledge and what they're doing. So I'm having these conversations like, this is like my first lecture, 3 lectures a day. And Jose knows this, I'm being worn out because when I was talking about racism, these issues before, no one was listening. Not because the uprising in racism, all of a sudden, oh my God, let's go find these people to talk to. I was exhausted before, I'm more exhausted now. And so we need to have a fundamental change in how science is being done, how it's funded, whose knowledge counts, whose science counts. We have a lot of work. I can go on and I don't want to keep talking, but this question, there's a reckoning happening across all the institutions, in all the professional associations, in all the disciplines. And it's important that we're being introspective. So I'll just end there. And where do we go from here? How we can look and what we can do better and how we can make it sustainable. It can't be 1 year, y'all. It can't be 5 years. This is a lifelong endeavor. We're talking about doing things for the next 30, 40, 50 years, because what we are as a country didn't happen overnight. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Those are just great points. And yeah, thank you so much for your really thoughtful insights. Joel, do you want to take over?
Yeah. Thanks, Udita, and thanks again for all these insights from our panelists. We're going to go into the last question that we have pre-prepared for the panelists before we open up to the group Q&A. And this one I'm actually going to combine with some of the questions in the Q&A that have been uploaded. And it's the broad question of how do we get involved? And we have a really broad audience on this conference call today. We have undergraduates to tenured faculty members to government employees, from the sciences, from the humanities. So to whatever group you can speak best, how do you get involved if you're an earth scientist and you want to seek out people that are doing environmental justice work? If you're a social scientist, how do you find an earth scientist that you need? How do you actually find and connect with communities in a meaningful way? Just any advice you can give our audience on best practices. Well, I'm interested, this is important. I don't know how to start. How do we start? And Sukobi, I'd like to direct this to you to start with, and of course we'll go to all the panelists to get their input.
Oh, no, thank you for this is a great question. I got started in this work because I went to UNC Chapel Hill for grad school, and I was mentored by Dr. Steve Wing, who passed away 4 years ago. Actually, the day after the election, he passed away. And Dr. Wing had a project. We was a CBPR project was engaging folks around industrial hog farms. So I got involved as a student member of the team because I had my own funding to get involved in that work. I started working with Omega Wilson with the West End Revitalization Association. He came to a North Carolina EJ network meeting saying they needed help around basic amenities. They didn't have publicly regulated sewer and water infrastructure. And so he came to the meeting asking for help. And so myself, another student, Chris Haney, and John Cooper. John Cooper is now the Vice President for Community Engagement at Texas A&M. Chris Haney is a associate professor at Hopkins now. I'm a associate professor, at Maryland. But we connected to him through a conference, through this EJ network. And so those are just examples of how, students, you should be looking for professors who are doing this work in communities. I think for professors, we have to follow more of a community university model. We have to restructure our curriculum so it's more integrated, and it brings community in. So look at what North Carolina State is doing with their public science program. So NC State, Dr. Karen Cooper, the work that they're doing at NC State is an example of how a university can kind of transform itself to be more citizen science focused or public science focused. That's an example. I think working through professional associations. So I know someone on the panel will talk about AGU, but look at the AGU now has like a health group. And so, connecting to communities that way. Union Concerned Scientists, Adrian Hollis, UCS is doing a lot of work connecting scientists to communities. That's another resource. Citizen Science Association, we have an environmental justice practitioners work group. So we have EJ folks from across the country who are part of this work group. You want to work with folks on the ground, front line, fence line, that's a resource. They're looking for collaborators. So the EJP work group. As I said earlier, Community Campus for Partnerships for Health, CCPH, that's another place that you can learn You can learn how to do a CBP, disciplinary action research. Also, for those of you who want to make sure, well, I want to make sure I'm getting properly metrics and evaluated. They also have team promotion guidelines that can be adopted to bring that into geomorphology or the geosciences. So look at those guidelines. In addition, for other partners, if you want to bring in public health scientists, look at the American Public Health Association Environment section. We have an EJ subcommittee. That's another way, and we have community members who are part of that subcommittee. And so that's another way to connect communities. And at the local level, a lot of times when I work with communities, they don't call me, they don't connect to me directly. They usually go through either a lawyer who they contacted for some assistance, or a green group. So try to work with chapters of your Sierra Club or NRDC, EDF, whatever local green group you have. More than likely, they have connections with communities or connections to communities. And so I'll stop there. I'll come back around again to give other examples, but those are some of the examples I say those are ways to engage communities. But before I stop there, when you go looking for a community, it could be difficult. You got to go think about how do you engage communities. I usually think about engage communities around food, faith, family, health, and jobs. So how can your skills, how can your tools, that's making it that's environmental justice, y'all. Making science every day, making it pocketbook, making it proximal. That's how you can really share your skills with folks. So when you work with communities, you got to think about what are the priorities for them. So it's less about your priorities and more about their priorities. And then I'll stop here. And how do you provide? You got to think about how you can provide technical assistance and service. How you can use research as a service to communities, not to really answer research questions, providing service to help answer their questions. So thank you.
Thanks, Sakobi. And there's a bunch of great resources there. And I just want to point out that I'm going to try to compile all this. And when we post the video on YouTube and on our website, we'll include a link to some of these resources so that you can go find out about ways that you can get involved. And I also want Rebecca and Jose to be able to chime in on this about how we get involved, and particularly as scientists too, how might we be able to secure funding for some of these aspects so we can devote more time than just time outside of work and straight volunteering. So Rebecca, I'll go to you first and then we can come to Jose.
Do not have a good answer on the funding. so Jose, I'm hoping you do. And I thought Sakobi gave just, that was so many resources. So I will just say two quick things. One is that most campuses, I believe, have kind of service learning offices that will help you connect your classes to hands-on projects that community organizations want you to do. And so that can be a good resource. And the other thing I would like to suggest is for those of you that have really good hands-on instrumental skills, there's an organization called Public Lab, which works on making monitoring tools that are affordable and easy for citizens to use. For citizens worries me a little bit as a term, for people in communities to use. And I would encourage you to check them out if you're really good at designing things.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. Jose?
Yeah, this is a really great question. And, Sakobi has so much experience in this, and the resources that, he outlined, the groups that already exist that have been involved in this work. I think we need to leverage those and get involved. The work that Claire and I are doing in Centerville, we got looped in, just as Sakobi said. We had lawyers who were working for a community, who were in desperate need of scientists who had an expertise, any kind of expertise that they could that they could share in hydrology and in geomorphology. And just by luck, someone pointed them our way. And since that moment, and it's happened again in the other work that we're doing in other communities, I'm wondering if, and this is me speaking selfishly to us as a community, as a geomorphology community, I wonder if EPSP, Earth and Planetary Surface Processes of AGU, if there's some way we could leverage our organization, either on the web profile that we have available, or somehow let communities know, and lawyers who may be working for these communities and green agencies who might be working for these communities, to make it easier for them to find us. And I think that's could be an incredible way to link our great community, who full of wonderful people who want to give to communities who need help. I think that will also serve, because the other issue, and it's a criticism that we have to take, and it's a fair, I don't even call it an indictment, because we can still do something about it. But we as scientists have, for too long, for folks who've worked with communities, we've gone into communities all across the world, collected data, wrote our papers, and left, right? We've extracted information. And in this case, my worst nightmare would be to have scientists go into communities in need. I don't want to use that word, but it's the word that comes to mind, to exploit the situation, the vulnerability, the crises that this community is under to further, scientific careers, you name it. So I think EPSP, that some organizing under this AGU umbrella, for example, it doesn't have to be this, but it seems convenient, and there's an infrastructure that we could leverage. would make it easier for communities in need to get a hold of us, to quickly, find the expertise that could be of use. And for scientists and undergrads and anyone who wants to contribute, signing on and participating in this way, we can commit to scientists. We need to commit to them practicing according to a set of ideals, and hold them accountable, so that they don't just take the money and data and run. They're in it, because it's Robert Bullard. I'm sure you heard him say this, Kobe. He said, "This work is hard. This work is really hard, and it's not for everybody. It's just not." Because there are times when the feelings of hopelessness, and you get tired. So Kobe, we owe him so much for all the work that he's doing, and it is hard. And I don't even know where I'm going other than to say thank you, Sokobi, and thank you all for organizing this. Quickly, I wanted to point out, Sokobi, I think, threw up some lots of good info on EJ conferences. I had a conversation with some program managers, officers of NSF, and there are 3 different ways we could leverage NSF for this. There's a great interest in NSF to do this type of work, and at the moment, the 3 programs that come to mind that were pointed to me was the Gold, which is opportunities for leadership and diversity. There was some discussion that we could leverage EJ work for folks who were interested in community service research to find resources that way. There's a GeoPaths, which has a very explicit community service, focus in it, for folks who are interested in helping undergraduates and graduates get involved in this kind of work. And a lot of it, this speaks to how new this is, but Claire and I just were recently awarded through GLD, Geomorphology and Land Use Dynamics, an eager grant, right? This is relatively high risk, and I don't think high risk, I don't think is the right term for it, but it's new and it's unique. We're trying to answer basic geomorphology questions about how the Mississippi River floodplain works, while at the same time taking that information and using it to help address a long-standing environmental justice problem. So it's new, but I'm excited that the interest to have you all here. I think there are at least 63 of you who are on here at this moment. It makes me feel hopeful and excited about what's to come.
Great. Thank you for all those resources. Jose, I really like your idea about finding ways that we can use AGU or AGU EPSP to kind of make a center for the intersection of geomorphology and environmental justice, where scientists can get information and non-scientists can come. I actually run the website, so I'll be coming back to you and we can chat about this offline, so I can get more of your ideas. Okay, I think we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we get to some of the participant submitted questions. So I'm going to hand it over to Udita to go through some of these questions that we've had popping up in the chat.
So yes, Thank you. So the first question, that's the most upvoted question in the Q&A for Zoom, is something we have been already talking about a lot, and I think it has been sort of answered, but I'll still read out the question, and you all can add whatever you want to add onto it. So what processes would you recommend for finding and connecting with communities, particularly those already worked on relevant issues, so scientists can collaborate and help in respectful and inclusive ways? I think Jose was already talking about this. And do you want to add something, or Jacoby, or Rebecca?
Yeah, I'll just speak very, very briefly, Matt. I think super excited about the potential for us to leverage our community, AGU community, to make it easier for communities in need to find us. And as Jacoby said, there are a number of agencies and legal teams, you call it, that are on the ground and are on the front lines. I won't speak to those of them that don't do this well, but there are some that are really there for communities. And we've been recently working with lawyers from Earth Justice and NRDC, and if you can link up and meet with whatever the offices near wherever you are, that could be a really quick way just to let them know that you are there as a potential expert. That they could, turn to you when they need help. And it's also an opportunity for you to learn about the great work that they're doing in your community.
Thank you.
Chime in real quick. You're exactly right. I do a lot of work with lawyers, y'all. So lawyers, it's like this. It's like, for those of you who are a little bit older, like me, it's like the Super Friends. We got to team up. So you got to have, the old school Wonder Twin power. Some of your young folks don't know anything about that. That's like the 80s. But yeah. You got to have a scientist work with communities with lawyers. Omega would say he would go into community meetings with the town mayor and the town council, and he would be naked. Like, he wouldn't have a scientist or a lawyer. We have to team up more. I'm on the advisory board for Namati. Look at Namati. Namati does a lot of global EJ work and training folks to be sort of like they call it barefoot lawyers outside of the US, but they're bringing their model of, basically, for those the term promotores, health promotion, is like legal promotores, local community folks knowing the law. They also need data. They need science. So as Jose said, Earth Justice, we work with an Environmental Integrity Project, which does a lot of science and legal work in DC area. Also, find your local environmental law clinic, because they are engaging communities, right? So again, we need to have scientists working more with lawyers. To me is a really good way. Then you provide that scientific service and that legal service in an integrated way to the community partners.
That's great. That's great suggestion. Thank you so much. Rebecca, do you want to add in something? Okay. Should we move on to the next question? Joel, do you want to?
Yeah. So the next question that's been upvoted the most in our Q&A is from Jane Willenbrain. And Jane asks, or states, there's been a lot of discussion about dam removal as failing old infrastructure. And this is something that Indigenous groups have worked towards and is great for wildlife, but also poses flooding hazards downstream. And the question here is, how do we juggle the needs of different stakeholders when we're thinking about these types of very complicated issues? And I'll, if there's a panelist who wants to go ahead, please, identify yourself if you have strong opinions about this, strong thoughts on how we do this in a balanced way.
Mm. I'll just speak briefly because it's a great question. I'm married to a civil engineer who is much smarter than me many times over, and this is what she's been doing a lot of work in the Northeast. Working with communities to improve fish habitat, reopen river corridors, you name it. And this question always pops up for them. Can you safely remove a dam and without dramatically increasing flood risk for communities that are downstream? And as far as I'm aware, the regulations that are in place, if your stream is sizable enough, Army Corps gets involved. There are limits to how much we can open up river corridors and pull dams down without, there's a limit to what we can do. But that doesn't answer this question. How do you go about when there are a variety of stakeholders who will be differently impacted by something, in this case, dam removal? What's the best way forward? And I think, the only way forward is you've got to bring people to the table and get people involved. And this goes right back to what Sokobi said at the beginning, time and time again, for decades and decades and decades, if not longer, let's go centuries and centuries. The poor, the Black, the brown, these are folks who are not invited to the table. These are folks, in this case, indigenous communities and the rights they have, ancestral rights they have to their land. They're not involved. And that's where things, that's where the balance of justice goes awry. And I think for too long, that has been the case. So I think, at a minimum, we need to get, and then this goes back to a community that I've met, a Native American community in coastal Louisiana, who are located, just 30 miles east of Port Fourchon, and if for those of you who know what Port Fourchon, this is the, one of the major ports for piping in petroleum and petro goods, petrochemicals. I think 20% of the nation's petroleum gets funneled in through Port Fourchon, and state and federal money, hundreds of millions of dollars have been pumped in to keep that above sea level, while communities to the east and west, vulnerable indigenous communities, poor white communities, you name it, are sinking, are literally sinking. These are communities, right? What is the Union of Concerned Scientists, the latest estimate? There are 90 communities across the country right now that go through sunny day flooding, chronic flooding. That number is going to double in 15 years. It's happening now. And I think we need to hear from those communities, and how we manage the landscape and how we attempt to mitigate the ongoing impacts of climate change have to involve those voices. That's that I meant to speak. I got too rambling, but apologies.
No, thanks for that. I think, these are all good things to think about. And, Sokobi also put in the chat these ideas about collective governance. Again, just bringing everyone to the table so we can hear all the issues and try to reach an agreement that's going to benefit everyone. We're coming up on the hour, but I think maybe we can try to ask one more question, and we might go a minute or two overwards, and then try to wrap it up. And just a reminder for those that need to take off at the hour that we're going to try to be compiling some resources on our AGU EPSP webpage. So you can get involved, and hopefully this can be the start of your journey into environmental justice, or a continuation if you're already involved. I'll turn it over to Udita for last question.
This is a question from YouTube, and I think this is pretty important. So the question says, has there been any thought of developing supplemental teaching materials, case studies, data, activities that could be used in geoscience courses to teach environmental justice issues?
I don't know of a compilation of such things. Jose, maybe you do, but I believe there are quite a few people that have developed such exercises for their classes. So maybe one other thing that EPSP could do would be to put together a clearinghouse for those kinds of exercises. I know I'd love to see that.
Thank you. Jose, do you want to add something?
No, this is a great question. It's something that I'm actively trying to do, change up every course I teach. So they talks about this, whether it's geomorphology or GIS, whatever it might be. I want my students to know that these problems exist, and to have some skills that they can go off into the world and help address them. I haven't perused the NAGT, the National Association of Geoscience Teachers, that their incredible set of resources they have available, and I shamefully need to do that right away. But I would say for folks who are just interested in learning more about this topic, and are thinking about maybe having their students read a textbook that highlights, explains this topic in a way that's useful for them. You know, we talked about Robert Bullard. You know, he's written scores of books about the environmental justice movement and presented, you know, how environmental injustices have played out, you know, in this country, particularly with regards to how we have affected Black communities. But there's Beverly Wright. There are scores of environmental, you know, justice scholars who have also dedicated part of their lives to important parts of their lives to activism as well. But Sokobi, you know, you could list others, but I'm thinking of Dorceta Taylor and other folks.
Yeah.
There are lots of great scholars to produce work that we could use.
Yeah, I would check out those books. I mean, there are a lot of EJ books out there. I mean, Julian Agnew has a book on just sustainability. There's something called the Rutledge Handbook on Environmental Justice. That thing is huge, just thick. You can use that for two or three classes. So check out the Rutledge. I got one little small chapter in it, but that's like a plug for the Rutledge Handbook on Environmental Justice. Probably like 300, 400 pages of good stuff.
Thank you so much. Those resources are great. Also, there are some comments from YouTube that says SCRC has materials that relate to EJ, and they also have a teaching for sustainability section. So I think that is great resources. And we should definitely put all the resources together after this panel. This has been great. Thank you so much. Joel, if I can turn it over to you.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks again to all our panelists and our participants. I mean, this has been really educating for me as someone who doesn't know that much about environmental justice and hasn't been involved. I feel like I have some great resources now to think about how I want to move forward in my own life and career. So I really appreciate that. And I know we didn't get to answer everyone's questions, but I think what we've seen today is that there really is big interest in our Earth and planetary surface processes communities about how we can get involved and how we can learn more. So hopefully this is just the start of the conversation. I want to remind people to check out our Twitter feed, where we're going to also be tweeting about environmental justice related issues and resources. And that again, next month, on November 18th, we're going to be talking about a specific case of dam removal, and Josh Galster is going to talk about the demographics of that. So thank you again to everyone. We really appreciate your time. And stay tuned to the website, where we'll be posting resources. And if you have additional resources that didn't come up in this chat, be you a panelist or a participant, you can feel free to email us. My email is on the website. We're happy to try to serve as a clearinghouse for the geomorphology community. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.